Recently in my Tamil channel, a viewer made an interesting observation. He said, the Bible says those who are born of God do not sin. But when I ask Christians to show me a Christian who does not sin, they cut off contact with me. Why is that? This is a very interesting question. According to the Bible, Christians are born of God. The Bible also says in 1 John 3:9 that all those who are born of God, meaning all Christians, do not sin. So this gentleman is asking Christians to show him a Christian who does not sin, and they simply disappear without answering. Why is that? Why don't they point to Christians who do not sin? Because they don't exist. That is one of the hardest realities that Christians don't want to talk about. The Bible clearly states in 1 John 3:9, whoever has been born of God does not sin, for his seed remains in him and he cannot sin, because he has been born of God. A Christian does not sin, according to the Bible. In fact, they cannot sin. But it is undeniable fact that all Christians sin. Then how do you explain this? Christians try to avoid this by quoting another verse in the Bible, one that seems to suggest the Bible itself admits that Christians do sin. They quote 1 John 1:8, which states, if we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. Christians point to this verse and say, see, even the Bible admits that Christians do sin, so you cannot expect Christians to be sinless. But there is a problem. Even Christians are divided as to whether this verse is talking about Christians or non-Christians. There are Christian groups which claim that even though the writer of 1 John 1:8 includes himself when he says, if we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, he is actually making an evangelistic call to non-Christians, urging them to admit they are sinners and recognize their need for salvation. So Christians cannot simply claim that 1 John 1:8 allows the possibility that Christians sin. But even if we accept that 1 John 1:8 is talking about Christians sinning, it still doesn't solve the problem created by 1 John 3:9, which says Christians do not sin. It only exposes a contradiction. If 1 John 1:8 means that someone who sins can still be a Christian born of God, then why does 1 John 3:9 say that those who are born of God do not sin? This is where Christians begin to twist their own Bible, reinterpret it, and tell you that words don't always mean what they say. They will say when the Bible says those who are born of God do not sin, it does not mean they never sin. It only means they don't continue in sin, or that they don't live in sin, or that they don't live a sinful lifestyle. In fact, modern Bible translations such as the NASB translate this verse to say that Christians do not practice sin and cannot sin continually. See the translation on the screen. NASB. No one who has been born of God practices sin because his seed remains in him, and he cannot sin continually because he has been born of God. So the wordings of 1 John 3:9 have been changed in the modern times. The modern Bible translations claim that these different wordings are allowed by the original Greek text. Let's assume they are right. Let's assume that the modern translations got it right when they say no one who has been born of God practices sin and cannot sin continually. It still doesn't solve their problem. It still means Christians don't sin. It still means they cannot sin. I will explain why. The older English translation such as the NKJV says, whoever has been born of God does not sin, he cannot sin. The modern translations say, no one who has been born of God practices sin, he cannot sin continually. What is the difference between the two? One says a Christian does not sin. The other says a Christian does not practice sin. What is the difference? Christians would say the first category describes those who have completely stopped sinning, no sin at all, zero sin in their lives. And the second category describes those who occasionally sin, once in a while. Christians try to create a distinction here to solve the problem. But there is no distinction, no difference between the two phrases. Both a Christian does not sin and a Christian does not practice sin mean exactly the same thing. If one person says, I do not drink alcohol, and another says, I do not practice drinking alcohol, what is the difference? There is no difference. Both mean they don't drink alcohol. When a person says, I do not practice drinking alcohol, he doesn't mean he still drinks. I do not drink and I do not practice drinking may sound slightly different, but both are claims about the same behavior. If you walk up to that person and finds a bottle in his hand, both statements immediately fail. So when the modern translations say that those who are born of God do not practice sin or cannot sin continuously, they create an artificial distinction. They are not describing a real category of people who have stopped sinning. They are only relabeling the same claim in language that sounds softer but means exactly the same thing. And there is one more problem. If the statement, a person who is born of God does not practice sin means he might sin occasionally, then what is the difference between a person who is born of God and a person who is not born of God? Even many non-Christians fall into that pattern. The verse has now become a claim that describes everyone, including non-Christians, which means it describes no one in particular. It has lost all meaning. So the modern Bible translations performed a linguistic illusion. They changed the words without changing the meaning, creating the impression of a softer standard while delivering exactly the same one. And the only reason to perform that illusion is because the plain original statement was too embarrassing to defend. And that brings us back to the original observation. When you ask Christians to show a sinless Christian, they cannot show one, because such a person does not exist. But the Bible claims that those who are born of God do not sin and cannot sin. So we are left with only two possibilities. Either the Bible is making a false claim, or no Christian in the entire history of the past 2000 years has ever truly been born of God. Either way, Christianity stands exposed as a false religion.